All right. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. My name is Brandon Wilkes. I am the education coordinator at the Haynesboro Public Library. I want to thank Cindy Buxton and Russ White for putting this together. It's the Armchair Traveler series, continuing on. Tonight we have Brian Weed exploring Adak Island. Just want to let everyone know when they came in, they were muted. If you have your camera on, please turn it off. Please keep yourself muted throughout this program. At the very end, you can unmute yourselves, ask any questions you want. If you'd like to turn on your camera, feel free. But just to keep everything focused on the main presentation, we'll just go ahead and keep it quiet out in the audience. So I will throw it over to Cindy and Russ for our intro.
Hi, my name is Cindy Buxton. I'm the organizer of this talk series. We have, in this spring, we had 7 talks and we have 4 left. Tonight we'll hear from Brian Weed and Russ will introduce Brian. And then a week from now on Thursday, next Thursday, Dennis Geeson will give a talk about Around the Matterhorn. Deborah Schnabel will give one on April 7th. And then we have several more after that. We're pretty much full for the spring, but we might do this again next fall and hopefully next spring as well. So if you want to give a talk, get hold of me and I'll put you in the schedule. So also, if you have questions for Brian during the talk, you can type it into the chat and he will answer them then, or he might do it after the talk. So now I'll have Russ introduce Brian.
So I've been hiking a couple times with Brian. I found out about him on Facebook through his Juneau Hidden History site. And a jack of all trades is a master of none, but oftentimes better than a master of one. That's his opening quote. Brian Weed was born and raised in Juneau, Alaska, and as a curious 10-year-old, he often explored the Treadwell mine on Douglas Island. Brian entered his first mine tunnel at age 12 using a lighter and a small flashlight. I think his equipment has improved since then. He is an Alaskan explorer, ROV pilot, amateur geologist, blacksmith, public speaker, actor, spelunker, and local historian. So a jack of many trades. Co-founder of the largest hiking club in Alaska, Juneau's Hidden History, with over 15,000 members. Brian has explored ghost towns, forgotten historic places, and hundreds of mines and caves all over Alaska and the west coast of the United States. And without further ado, here's Brian.
And thank you to the Haynes Library for putting on this Armchair Traveler series. It gives people like me a chance to share my adventures with the different audiences. Not everybody has Facebook, so to get on a different site and a different program definitely brings this information to other people. Well, I went to Adak Island. I went exploring. I had just retired with the state of Alaska, and about 2 weeks later, I got a call about a job on Adak Island that needed my skill set. The job was scheduled to be 8 weeks long, with a possible 2-week extension. I had never been to Adak. It's at the far end of the Aleutian chain. It's the furthest west city in Alaska. And it's also the furthest, well, excuse me. Yes, it's the furthest west and the furthest south in Alaska. But it's also the furthest west city in the United States. So I was going to go to Adak Island for a job. Now I'm still under contract for the job and a non-disclosure agreement was signed, so I can't go into detail about what that was. However, I can tell you it involved digging a lot of holes all around the airport area and looking for things that go boom. So my skill set was good at locating things underground. And so I went to Adak. Adak was locked down due to COVID. And let me make sure my PowerPoint's running. There we go. This is the Haynes runway, the Adak runway looking at Mount Sitkin, which is a large volcano about 20 miles away. I packed my 3 bags and jumped on the airplane. I had to bring everything I needed minus food. My job said they would provide food and lodging and vehicle transportation, that kind of thing. And so let me give you a little brief history of Adak and why it was important to me to go to Adak. So the Aleuts lived on Adak for somewhere around 10,000 years. Contact was made with Russian explorers in about 1732. And if you fast forward to World War II, in June of 1942, the Japanese invaded Attu and Kiska Islands at the end of the Aleutian chain, and essentially invading the United States. Alaska was still a territory, but Adak became the staging area for 100,000 troops that were set up to stop the Japanese from invading further into Alaska. And then after World War II, we had what was called the Cold War, where we were having trouble with Russia, and everybody was kind of flexing their muscles. It was a nuclear arms race. And during that time, there were 6,000 Navy and Coast Guard troops stationed on Adak with their families. So a lot of our viewers are those people that were stationed on Adak. What's interesting, during that time, many people weren't allowed to take pictures. You didn't know what was going on in the facility you worked at in some cases. For example, I spoke with a janitor who never saw into one of the rooms in the building he worked at because it was top secret and he only had secret clearance. So if a room needed to be cleaned, he would knock on the door, they'd take his mop bucket, clean their own office, and then he'd get his mop bucket back and, you know, go on with his day, but he never knew what was going on the other side of the door. And there is a lot of information online about Adak and its history and what went on, and old pictures. And I'm going to give you some links at the end of the talk on how to see those. But really, I want to talk about the things you don't usually see in the photos, because I didn't go caribou hunting like most people that go to Adak. There's about 4,000 caribou on the island that a lot of people go hunting for. I was in it for the history, so I wanted to go exploring. Here we have basically the middle of town. This was the place I was staying in. There are fourplexes everywhere. They're for sale for about $40,000, so $10K a unit. We rented from Aleutian Outfitters, where you get a, you know, we rented like 5 or 6 fourplexes because there was 20 of us for the job. And this is what it looks like inside. We had TV. There were a lot of DVDs. We, you know, traded DVDs with people all over the island. Once you watched all the videos in your room, you kind of started trading with people. I had to bring everything you see on counters and stuff, but as far as like microwaves and coffee pots and filters and stuff, that was all there. Washer dryer. I bought my own boot dryer. The company I worked for, nobody thought of doing that, so I was the only one with dry boots at the end of the day, which was kind of fun. And every morning I would have to go out into the garage. I'd shut this door behind me, and there were big rat traps that we had in the garage, and every morning the rat traps were full. And you'd go out there and you'd step on the rat trap, you'd kick the rat out, you'd open the garage door, and you'd kick the rats out into the street, and the eagles and the ravens would swoop down and grab the rats. And every morning, all my rat traps were filled in the garage. And so you never left this inner door open so the rats couldn't get into the house. Here you see all my camera equipment and batteries and backpacks and camping gear, because I had to bring everything I needed for the trip. Hot and cold running water. They had internet, but it was really slow. Texting, you couldn't stream video. You could check your email, that kind of thing, but for the most part, it was pretty slow. So this house was down the street from me. It had an electrical fire. They let it burn to the ground and they just left it. That's kind of how Adak worked. There was a gentleman whose boiler went out, and over the course of a weekend, he had picked out an identical house to his and moved all his things into that other house, just one room at a time. His family would move everything in, and the boiler worked in that house. So he basically just hopped from house to house every time something big broke that they couldn't fix. That was the 4th time he had house hopped since living on Adak, and I think he was in his early 30s. You can tell which houses are empty by which ones have mowed lawns. If you look down the street here, there's a couple of lawns that are mowed, but for the most part, all these houses are empty. They're owned by the Aleutian Corporation. Some of them are privately owned, but for the most part, the Aleutian Corporation owns the majority of town. They all had these little greenhouse things attached to each house. They're unheated, but definitely kind of nice to sit in when it was a windy day, but sunny. Here's Adak proper. Between these two slides, you are seeing pretty much 90% of all the buildings on Adak Island. These are the newer early 90s, late 80s buildings. We have the 70s and 60s buildings here on the far right. We have some water towers up here. These weird little buildings, I think I have a couple pictures of them later. We call them Smurf buildings. My understanding is they were modeled after like hurricane or tornado buildings out of Kansas, modular buildings. We have Mount Moffett in the background. It's an extinct volcano. And we have a couple high schools over here and Bering Hill. Over the course of this, we'll probably talk about Bering Hill a lot. There was a lot of things to do on Bering Hill. This is one of the newer high schools. My understanding, it wasn't even used. The base shut down in 94 and was officially shut down in 97, but pretty much everybody was gone by 94. Despite what you read online, you're going to hear that there's 400 people on Adak. It's more like 45. The fish processing plant closed down a number of years ago and all the jobs left. Pretty much there's a post office, there's City Hall, there's a small school. You could work for Alaska Airlines, which is pretty much completely subsidized by the federal government to land there. I don't think Alaska Airlines actually makes any money. And then there was a small store and a bar, neither of which were open much at all during the 10 weeks I was there. The first building I wanted to see was a building that stored nuclear warheads. At one time, it stored 70 nuclear warheads. It went by several different names. And if you were stationed here, please let me know in the chat, like what you called it. I've heard Reaction Force Facility or the MAUW, the Modified Advanced Underwater Weapons Facility. But there were 70 nuclear warheads stored behind these 7 doors. The locals call it the seven doors of doom. I'm told it looked like a mini NORAD. There was even a detachment of Marines that lived and guarded the facility. There was 22 bunks that I counted, not counting the officers' quarters. 2 guard towers, complete with urinals inside, which I thought was pretty exciting. So as a guard, you wouldn't have to leave your tower. You could just tuck up to the urinal and it drained out the side of the tower. There was a little shop here with all kinds of garbage. You're going to see garbage everywhere on Adak. And unfortunately, the military did not clean up their mess. There's 5 or 6 landfills. They were the few places I was not allowed to go due to asbestos and toxic stuff left behind. A lot of signs about explosives and chemicals and keep this door shut. I wandered around the facility. The doors now, most of them have padlocks on them, and my understanding is that the Aleutian Corporation was using them for storage now. But a couple of them were open, so I was able to walk in. No idea if there was any radiation or anything in there, but I kind of doubt it. Wandering around here, the pictures don't do it justice because the whole time it's blowing like 40-mile-an-hour winds. But I made sure I went in every building that I could. I can't show all the photos in this talk, but I did try to show the artwork because I have met several people that actually made some of this artwork. And it's been interesting to talk to the people. This was the officers' area. There was the bunk bed and 2 foot lockers, and it was a little bigger than where the rest of the Marines were. This is one of the quads. There were 4 bunks and 4 lockers for the Marines. And then there was like 6 or 7 quads where like 22, 24 Marines could sleep. Up on top of the roof, be able to peek out there and shoot out those holes if you needed to. You can see for miles, so it's not like anybody was going to sneak up on you. The other guard tower. And then each one of these had doors that could open up, so you could shoot out there. All the windows were fogged up, so you couldn't see through the windows. There was this one sandbag bunker that I thought was pretty interesting. I was on the far side of the grounds at this facility, and I was able to shimmy my way in. I was expecting to find all kinds of rat poop and rats, and I didn't see any of that. It was actually clean and dry. But I thought it was interesting that, you know, we have all that concrete building, and then we have this sandbag bunker over here. I'm up in the guard tower here looking down. And the problem is you can find photos of this facility that are black and white, that are older, but I haven't found a whole lot from the Cold War from this area. So it'd be interesting to see what it used to look like, because I know a lot of this has been cleaned up. A bunch of it was buried in landfills. Several times I'd hike out to spots where on satellite it looked like there was a bunker, and there would just be a mound of earth with no entrance. Moving on to the Adak National Forest, which is a big joke. Everybody says this is the only spot with trees on the island. And after being on the island for 10 weeks and exploring the whole thing, I can tell you that there are trees all over the island. You just have to know where to look. And being that I explored the majority of the island, I definitely saw all the trees. Next to the Adak National Forest, there's a little pet cemetery. There's 3 types of trees going on Adak. There's these spruce trees, there's these kind of low bush willow, and then there's a kind of a mountain pine tree that are starting to take over. And so I made sure I took photos of other trees around Adak just so people could see them. This sign back here in the background is one of the places I was not allowed to go. Basically, the spot here behind the trees is one big filled-in landfill, filled with asbestos, Rommel spikes, and all kinds of chemical stuff they buried. And there's 4 or 5 of these all over the island. And they were the few areas I was not allowed to go. In the background here, you can see where Quonset huts were during World War II. The majority of the north side of the island was covered in Quonset huts. When I show you later how to get to old photos, that's all you see is Quonset huts all over this island. More of our little trees. This set of trees was at the original cemetery. During World War II, soldiers that died were buried here. And then after World War II, they were shipped back to the mainland. So there's not a people cemetery on Adak Island. The only thing here is the pet cemetery. I was looking towards Lake Andy or Lake Andrew. There's a couple more trees there I was able to spot. So a lot of trees, despite what people say. Coming up on Bering Hill. This overlooks the town. Bering Hill had everything. I was honestly surprised at how much stuff was on Bering Hill. There was an underground swimming pool, an ice cream parlor, police station, fire station just down the hill, a hospital, movie theater, several restaurants, 2 churches, news station, dining hall, apartments, barracks. And then there's tunnels connecting all these buildings underneath the road system. So you didn't have to go out in the wind and rain to get to the far side of the base. One of the times when I was going down through the tunnels, it was flooded. And so I took 3 chairs with me, and I was stepping from chair to chair and kept rotating the next chair to the front. And there was 20-inch rats swimming past me in the tunnel, trying to climb up on the chairs as I was working my way through the tunnel. Keep in mind, I did have permission to go into all these buildings. They're owned by the Aleutian Corporation now, and so you do need permission. Most of the time, they'll turn you down just because they're afraid of people getting hurt or injured. Luckily, I was able to kind of present my resume and background, and so they believed me that I wouldn't hurt myself, even though I did fall through a floor twice in my 10 weeks on Adak. Apartment buildings built everywhere. My understanding is some of these apartment buildings weren't even necessarily lived in, but the contract was in place while the base was closing. So the construction workers continued to build these apartments, even though they knew the base was closing, because of how the contract was in place. They basically got paid to finish the building, and then it was never actually lived in. Most of the buildings are falling apart. They're leaking. This is the underground swimming pool. It's not pretty now. In fact, there are dead rats all over in the swimming pool, because once the rats fall into the swimming pool, they can't get out. As far as the Aleutian Corporation letting it fall apart, they didn't have any money. The Aleutian Corporation is pretty broke. The infrastructure on fixing up all these buildings would cost millions and millions of dollars. And with 45 people on the island, how do you fix that up? How do you bring in more supplies? So the buildings are kind of just left to rot, and without the funding, they're gonna just fall apart eventually. There was a full-size gym on Bering Hill with mirrors and Nautilus workout machines and free weights. I walked past several houses, saw people working out in their garages. So some of this stuff got moved to their garages and they work out now. There's a full-size gym. This is another view of Bering Hill. You'll notice the really nice little chapel on the right-hand side. The old chapel was built in 1944, but it was at a different location and was later moved by Seabees and the Public Works Department in 1953 to its current location. It's in the process of falling down. The whole kind of right-hand side of the church, all that's holding it up is basically a couple of 2x4s, which is a real shame because, as you can see, it's just a beautiful building, especially like sunset and sunrise. You get some great colors. You could line it up with the mountains. If you're into photography, like I could have sat here all day and taken photos of it. And often eagles would perch on the top of it. It's possible to go in any one of these buildings and they connect to all the others. This building here in the middle, my understanding was a hospital at one time. A gentleman I spoke with talked about being born in this building. Wasn't a hospital when I walked through it, but definitely neat. I did go in the church, despite my better judgment. I didn't fall through the floor in the church, but I think I was close a couple of times. I wanted to see if there was a bell in the tower, and there was not, so I was kind of disappointed. But you get an idea what the church looks like. Each different floor of the building. And keep in mind, I'm wandering through these buildings by myself. In most cases, I didn't have a cell signal. Somebody just lived just down on room 101. That's great. But for the most part, I was exploring these buildings by myself, and it's pretty creepy. You can hear the skittering of rats. You can hear water dripping. Every once in a while I get a cell signal, so I get a little bing sound. But for the most part, I was by myself, and I was kind of talking to myself just because it was pretty creepy half the time. My photos make it look real bright, but I was carrying a lot of lighting equipment also. I saw 4 or 5 different post offices, or at least where you could pick up mail. I thought that was interesting that, you know, even with such a tiny little place, they had multiple places to pick up mail. On Bering Hill, there was also an armory. I was able to walk in the armory. You could see where all the weapons were stored. A lot of the signs and stuff were still there. This is a typical room. You might have anywhere from 2 to 4 bunks. You'd have 2 to 4 foot lockers. Sometimes you'd have a shared bathroom, sometimes you'd have your own bathroom, depending on which apartment building or barracks I was in. Some of them had the windows busted out, so you see grass and other stuff that have blown in, or there were birds flying around the apartment buildings. And definitely spooky when you'd have a little sparrow or something coming flying down the hallway at you. Here's the McDonald's pizza parlor that was on Bering Hill. I thought that was pretty interesting to see that. They had spaghetti and garlic bread and definitely some things we don't see on the American menu. This is more of the restaurant. Like you can see, everything's in real poor shape. Now, I did see some of this furniture in some of the Quonset huts and other places nearby, so I know people scavenged some stuff here and moved it to other locations. Ice cream parlor, if you're familiar with Tiny Toons, it was a cartoon on TV. Bugs Bunny, Babs Bunny, Taz, and all those little guys. I thought it was cute to see that. It brought up childhood memories. There was a newsroom, if anybody worked at the news station. This room I didn't find right away, but I was able to, it was kind of tucked off to the side. Wasn't sure what it was at first until I saw this, and then I saw where all the monitors would be, where they would be doing the news station and rigging up which camera they were focused on. Dining hall. There were food trays, which was one of the reasons I knew what it was, but then was able to go back into the back area, and here's where you picked up your food and your trays and were served your food. Back in the kitchen, all the kitchen stuff is still there. There's all kinds of ovens and stoves and stuff. None of that was removed, so it's all still there. There was a theater, movie theater. I've talked to several people that watched all kinds of films here. It was in pretty good shape still, despite the broken glass. But the inside of the theater didn't have any leaks, didn't seem to have a whole lot of water damage. It was actually in pretty good shape. I'm up in the balcony looking out. Well, I guess it wasn't a balcony. It's where the camera would sit. Up in this this window up here is where I shot the last image. But as you can see, the chairs are in good shape. The carpet's mostly clean. The town doesn't use this, but it's one of the buildings that hasn't seen a whole lot of damage. Here's the kitchen area. You can see everything was just left behind. One of the bigger apartment buildings, my understanding is this one was one of the newer facilities. It was in the worst shape. It also had a tunnel that connected to the rest of Bering Hill. This is the main lobby. Each floor was identical. So once I had done one floor and I figured out they were identical, I kind of just breezed through this place real quick. Every room was almost the same: beds, dressers, shared toilets, just garbage and piles of stuff left behind. One room had all kinds of underwear in it. So locals have definitely been hanging out in it over the years. Each had a lounge at the end of the levels, so you could look out at the rest of the Bering Hill. It's kind of nice to sit up here on a rainy day and read a book. I did take pictures of every door, so if you did live in that facility, they still had signs with all the people who lived in it if they had made a personalized sign on their door. The phones. But part of me exploring Adak was to bring the memories back to the people who had been there, because, like I said, they weren't able to take photos of these places. They weren't able to share this with their family. They could describe it, but you weren't able to show it. And what I always tried to take pictures of was the artwork that I saw, or if a piece of paper had somebody's name on it. I'd specifically try to focus on those things because I knew that was important for preserving history for people that weren't allowed to take photos when they were there. This is one of the tunnels that connects the buildings together there on Bering Hill. Most of the tunnels were dry and clean, but some of them were flooded and had rats running through them. Just about every building I went into had some sort of mural. My understanding is this was a restaurant or some sort of all-you-can-eat buffet. It was at the bottom of Bering Hill. It was the building that was in the worst shape. It had seen a fire and heavy water damage. I wandered through it on a windy, nasty night and took a few photos. But my understanding is a lot of people like ate here, and it was a big hangout spot, like a barbecue place or something. But it was probably in the worst shape of all the buildings I went into. And keep in mind, when I was in the buildings, I was wearing an N95 mask because some of the buildings still had asbestos. They definitely had mold. There was dust, mildew, all kinds of bad stuff. And each night, even wearing that mask, I still coughed and didn't feel really great. This is the McDonald's everybody talks about on the internet. You know, it had the dino size menu items, Bobby's World toys, and the menu prices seem pretty normal for us today, but I assume they were pretty expensive on Adak at the time. Quarter pounder with cheese, I can't see the price, but a Big Mac's $2.45. I bet we're higher than that for a Big Mac now. By the time I left Adak, I was able to get this drive-through sign lit up at night, which was kind of fun to do. Okay, getting away from Bering Hill, I then spent about a week exploring Zito Point, and I'll point that out on a map later. It's north of town, kind of the far northeast of town. Zito Point had a lot of gun emplacements, a lot of bunkers. If you're familiar with some of the buildings out there, there was one called the Classic Wizard Station or Classic Wizard something. It was the big building out there and had these listening white ball radar dish monitoring things. The white radar ball things are gone now, but you could see where they were put in place with concrete footings. A lot of old cabins were falling apart. This is the coal stove made out of a buoy, like a metal buoy. We have this is excuse me, having a brain fart here. Clam Lagoon. A lot of times you'd see seals and sea otters out here. There's a base on the far side, a naval base off over this way. But Clam Lagoon would drain under a bridge, and the bridge was called Candlestick Bridge. And good grief, I'd see seals and sea otters being sucked out with the tide at about 60 miles an hour under this bridge. I don't know how the bridge was still standing. You can't drive cars on it anymore, but the footings looked okay on the bridge, and it didn't feel like it was going to fall apart on me. So I parked on one side and then walked across the bridge and then headed out here to Zito Point. But definitely a neat beach. I kept walking the beach. I'm one of those guys who like to go off trail and don't like to be attached by roads and rules and that kind of thing. So walked the beach, went exploring, then hiked up the hill. Zito Point and many of the other places, I don't recommend going off the road or the trail system. There's still World War II stuff hidden in the grass. For example, there was Rommel spikes. Rommel spikes, think sharpened rebar, like spear points hidden in the grass. I came across many of them that still had barbed wire strung between them So if you didn't skewer yourself on the sharpened spear, you tended to rip your jacket or your pants running into the rebar. Beautiful beaches from the north. And there's a little orange buoy down here. I looked all over for Japanese glass floats, and I didn't find a single one, but I definitely found enough foam and plastic floats to probably fill a 15-yard dumpster. A lot of sandals, rubber sandals. There must have been a boat that sunk that was carrying a bunch of them. Out here on Zito Point, there was also a lot of gun emplacements, so I made sure I hiked up there. Believe it or not, this is a truck. The grass is so tall, and the tundra and the tuskox, these bundles of grasses, have like made this truck disappear. The rear end of the truck's here, and here's the front end of the truck. Everything I found on the trip, whether it be a bunker or a building or a truck like this, I marked on GPS, and I'll show you on my maps where this stuff was. This is an old road, World War II road. You can see it's completely overgrown. I'm wading through about chest-high grass. Definitely tough. I'm glad I had trek poles, because there were several times you'd step off the bundles of grass called tuskox, and then you drop like 2 feet. So you're always kind of balancing on the grass to get around. Here's part of the old road. You can see where Quonset huts were here on the hillside. One there and one there. Some of the Quonset huts are still here. They're starting to fall apart, but in some cases they're here. There was a cleanup done where a lot of this stuff was buried, burned, or hauled off to the landfill. But a few of them survived. Epic views. Everybody will tell you Adak rains all the time. It's nasty. It doesn't look good. But for the most part, it was nice pretty much the whole time I was on Adak. There were a couple of days that were bad. But maybe 7 days out of 10 weeks, I had bad weather. And so I just made sure I wandered around to every building I could. This is the classic Wizard building, if you were stationed here. It was in pretty poor shape. I did a little bit of video in it. I didn't take a whole lot of photos in it just because most of the walls were busted out. So it was like 2 big rooms. All the North Shores had large rocks like this. So if you're on the north side of the island, you got to see all these big boulders. We're coming up here on one of the fallout shelters. There's about a dozen fallout shelters on the island, and each one had 84 beds where people could stay in there. This one's right near the airport. It had most of the equipment. The bunks were still there. So if you are gonna, go explore Adak, I recommend the fallout shelter right next to the airport. You can see all the mold and mildew. Definitely bring a mask with you if you're out wandering around. What was nice was I downloaded all my maps ahead of time and had them on my phone. So I was able to use those maps to get around. And in this case, like I saw something white on the map. And so I drove out and hiked to it. And it turned out to be fish bones from the local fish processing plant. This is the site of the underground hospital. My understanding, it was destroyed in the 1970s to keep the Cold War kids from going in and playing in it. It was starting to fall apart to the point where it was completely bulldozed and taken apart. It was one of the few places I wasn't allowed to go due to asbestos, but I still managed to hike up above it and kind of get views of how big it was. The cemetery. And like I said, nobody's buried at the cemetery anymore. Everybody was removed after World War II. Just wonderful sunsets on all the beaches. Every night I'd go to the beach and kind of play around with my boss's dog and have a good time. This is out at Mitchell Field. We have the dinosaur cage or elephant cage building here in the background. I think I have a few photos of that as we get there. Picture a big airplane hangar here. And then there were these 2 side buildings where I believe people would sleep on each side. The furthest building was turned into kind of a hangout club by the locals. So me and a couple buddies went in here a couple of times and played darts and kind of hung out on rainy days. just to give us something to do away from our houses. Every once in a while, you come across a vehicle abandoned out in the middle of a field like this. This is right next to Lake Andrew. One time there were a lot of kids here. The Lake Andrew Recreation Building, that's where the playground is. All locked up, all boarded up, not being used anymore. I came out here a few times. There is a plane crash out in the lake. We were able to take the ROVs out there on a non-windy day, which didn't happen very often, and look for the plane wreck, but I was never able to find it. I didn't have a side scan sonar system in order to locate it. This is the Navy base by Clam Lagoon. So I'm sure some of you worked here or did things here. I saw there was an amateur radio office. There was a photography office. There were some tunnels under the base, but not an extensive amount. This area reminded me of a scene from the Walking Dead zombie TV show. You'd be walking around and you'd hear like squeaky fans and stuff, like the metal would make noise in the wind, and you're kind of out by yourself and you just expect to see, you know, a horde of zombies as you came around a building or something. I tried to group all these photos. So the photos you're seeing are at this facility. It had its own gym also. Here you're seeing a bunch of signatures on the walls. If you were indeed here right before the base closed, it looks like a lot of people came here and signed their names and wrote things, and I took photos and video of this whole wall in the base. So if you did end up doing that, contact me. Let me see if we can find your name or find your friends. But whole wall of signatures, and definitely I could see would bring back memories for people. We got the 2-lane or 4-lane bowling alley. Much of the floor had been ripped up, and for some reason, people scrapped all the machine parts. Working my way up the mountainside there, looking at all the buildings. This building, I never figured out what it was, so if somebody knows, that'd be really great. It was up above everything else at that last Navy base we were at. I'm kind of moving along here because I know I'm going long. Russ is going to get on my case here in a minute. So I did go pack rafting at one time. I don't recommend it. The wind caught me and kind of almost sucked me out to sea. I was able to get back to Zito Point and hike back to my car, which took several hours. Gas prices were around $5.29 a piece. The price of beer here, I know it's a bad photo, but an 18-pack of Miller was $50. You know, $80, $68 for beer. This was near the airport, an observatory. I can still speed it up a little, Russ. I know I'm going slow. Bunkers everywhere, and I marked every bunker. The bunkers were sold at one point where the locals turned them into little hunting cabins. So there's bunkers all over the island, and some of them you could tell people had lived in them for quite a while. But now with 45 people on the island, they're pretty much abandoned now. These are the Smurf houses I was telling you about that are kind of based on modular homes in Kansas to protect you against tornadoes. The ugliest things I've ever seen. All those houses were abandoned. Nobody wanted to live in them. All of them were filled with mold and mildew. I went in a couple of them, but I definitely didn't go in all of them. They were all identical. Overlooking town. Now we're at the hot springs. So on Adak, there's 2 geothermal hot springs. They're both on the north side of the island. This is one of my favorite little coves on the north side. You can see a rope coming down the hill here. It looks like it's not very steep, but it's pretty steep. I mean, I could do it without the rope, but if the grass was wet, you could end up at the very bottom of that hill real quick. There was always a great sunset here. I'd always try to come out here if I knew there was going to be a good sunset, and I just sit here on the top of the hill and just enjoy the view. I mean, at one point I measured and I was seeing islands over 60 miles away on the horizon. So working my way over to the hot springs. The hot springs were to the left over here. You can't see my finger, so I have to use my mouse pointer. To get to the main hot springs, you have to come down the beach. You walk around the corner here. There's another rope that was set up over here. You have to climb up and down this rocky point, which requires a lot of arm strength. I don't recommend it unless you know how to rock climb. But once you work your way around, you get here to, this is the hot springs. It's not very exciting. But when I was here, there was a whole bunch of baby seals laying in these warm pools. I even brought a towel thinking I was going to lay in a hot springs, but after seeing a bunch of baby seal turds floating around the water, I was not going to get in the water whatsoever. The water was too hot at its source. But in these pools where they kind of mixed with ocean, it was, I don't know, 90 degrees or so. This was kind of the source under this rock here, and any of these pools are almost too hot to touch. Looking around at more Quonset huts. Of course, I looked in every single one. I wanted to see what each thing was. This is the Lorenz station. My understanding is Lorenz stations are like pre-GPS buildings. That's Clam Lagoon. A lot of times it was hard to tell what things were. I'd have to compare them to old photos. Like this was a submarine and what are those little World War II boats called? Like PTOs, PT cruiser kind of things. I can't think of the name. Anyways, small torpedo boats were outfitted here at this facility. There was all kinds of buildings. It was a submarine outfitting base. The submarines would pull in here on Finger Cove and load up. I made the mistake of dropping my ROV in here on the first day we did an ROV dive. And I found out that they used bulldozers and bulldozed these buildings directly into Finger Cove. So as soon as we dropped the ROV down, there were pipes and building materials and rebar everywhere, and immediately got stuck and panicked. We managed to get the ROV free right at the last minute before the battery died, but it was a close call. We almost lost about a $5,000 piece of equipment on the first day. Here you can see where, Quonset huts are all over the hillside. And then this is the Boy Scout building here in the front. Exploring the Boy Scout building. Lots of memories, Girl Scout building. So if you use these facilities or anything, definitely contact me because I definitely have lots more images. Here we call the Adak carpet. A lot of Instagram photos have this. Basically, the windows break and grass starts growing in these buildings. Definitely neat to wander through and leave your footprints behind. The Bob Reeves High School. Most of the photos I couldn't show you guys because for some reason there is a plethora of penises drawn on all the walls in the high school. So I had to make sure I didn't have any of that in my slideshow. Every once in a while I'd come across things on the satellite map. I just had to see what it was. I believe these were rings that went on fuel canisters so they could roll the fuel canister. But there was a whole field of these things just sitting out in the middle of nowhere. World War II sandbag bridge. And there's our rats. As you can see, they're as big as my shoe plus their tail. I have a size 10 shoe. Also on my trip, I wanted to see a fern that grows on Adak Island called the Aleutian shield fern. I followed some university studies where they had located some on Mount Reed, which is close to town. And me and my buddy Ben and his friend's dog, Daisy, our boss, went out there and looked for this fern. We ended up finding it, but it was late in the season, so it was dry and cracked. But we later found out that the fern, somebody had relocated one of the ferns to one of the buildings that had some broken out windows. And so that fern was actually green and bright, and we were able to get pictures of it. This is the top of Mount Reed. It's the false peak. On the main peak of Mount Reed is a 20-foot across eagle's nest that has probably been there for 100 or more years. These two eagles were circling it the whole time and wouldn't let us get anywhere near it. There's our Aleutian shield fern. This fern is closely related to a Japanese fern, but my understanding is a completely different species and only grows here on Adak in a few bunches that they've found and are closely monitored. This is one of the occasions where I could see 60 miles. That last point out here is one of the islands on the Aleutian chain, and it was about 62 miles away from me. All you flat earthers out there, you can, it's flat. There's no curve. Earth is flat, totally. Wonderful sunsets. This is one of the native village sites. Always, when I check these out, it was always super respectful. I always try to do it from a distance using telephoto lenses, so I'm not wandering around through the old village sites. You could see where the midden sites used to be. My understanding is there's 8 feet of seashells. So the Aleuts lived here for a very long time. They lived in ground houses. This would be one of the impressions were of the ground house. And they kind of looked like this. This is from the Privilofts, done with whalebone and driftwood. But for the most part, you lived partially underground to stay warm. As far as caribou, I didn't see any caribou. I didn't see any caribou up close, but I wasn't really looking for caribou at the time. There were 4,000 on the island, and everybody goes to Adak to see the caribou. So it wasn't something I was looking for. This is one of the days I climbed to Mount Moffett looking for airplane crashes. There were several airplanes that crashed during World War II. It was foggy. They couldn't see the runway. Radar wasn't any good. So I hiked up and located several airplane wrecks. My understanding is all of them had been previously documented, but now they're marked on GPS. So if you were to go to Adak, you could use my maps and locate them yourselves. There's the rest of Mount Moffett there. Now I did come real close to the peak on Mount Moffett, but I didn't have ice grips and I got pretty glazed ice at the top, so I ended up turning around. This is Husky Pass. If you've ever been out caribou hunting, this is one of the routes a lot of the caribou hunters take to go find the caribou. This is Bay Islands and Husky Pass. That's Mount Reed with the Aleutian shield ferns on them. And the Aleutian shield ferns are growing here on the steep hillside in this area right here. So you get up there and it's pretty slick stuff. So you definitely have to be careful. And before I knew it, it was time to leave Adak. I'd been there 10 weeks. We partially finished the job. We ended up having to quit at the end. The ground was starting to freeze up on us and we couldn't safely dig anymore after finding some explosives. Here is Bering Hill from the air. The main part of town is off over this way. But these are all the buildings we saw. This is the old church. This is one of the newer churches. And all these buildings are connected via tunnels. And that's the end of my slideshow. But if you give me just a minute here before we go to questions, I wanted to show you a few things. If you're on your computer, I have a website called alaskashiddenhistory.com. It's here on the page. And I mark all my waypoints on this. And you can go to explore locations after you go to alaskashiddenhistory.com. And I have 4 maps around Alaska. Of course, I live in Southeast Alaska, so it's going to have the most waypoints. But with the help of my friend Gabe Emerson, who runs a website called Save It for Parts, we've put together these maps of places we've been or explored all over Alaska. This is our Southwest map. And on the Southwest map are many of the photos from all the locations I visited here on Adak. I'm starting to put the waypoints in and make it so if you're on a computer per se, you can click on this little icon and it will show you those trees. And you can enlarge it and make it bigger and go through the different photos. I'm in the process of attaching all my photos to the Adak area, so you can see slideshows of, how to get to the hot springs. I'll have some videos exploring some of the buildings, especially some of the tunnels up on Bering Hill. And each one describes, like the hallway or the Bering Hill Theater. So you can show your family members where you were stationed from a satellite map, so they get a better idea of what it looked like. I even have some of the tunnels marked here and how they connected to the different buildings. So that's one way you can explore Adak Island, is using the satellite map on alaskashiddenhistory.com. Keep in mind, if you live in Southeast Alaska, you may want to look at that Southeast one. I got a lot of good stuff there. Now, I also have a YouTube page, Alaska's Hidden History, and it has some Adak videos on here exploring the fallout shelter, exploring the McDonald's, and some of the other Adak stuff. I haven't loaded all my Adak videos yet, just because I had so much, and I've had other projects going on. But if you're into that, definitely check those out. Oop, and I think hold up. There we go. And then one more site I want you to know of. If you're looking for old photos of Adak, go on Google and go State of Alaska Digital Archives. The State of Alaska has a website that has old photos of Alaska. And you can come here to the advanced search bar and type in Adak, and you will find hundreds of photos of Adak during World War II that have been released, where you can see what it looked like when you or your grandfather or whoever was stationed there. When the runways were being built, you're going to see people, probably people the naval station. I mean, definitely some fantastic stuff. Like this is Mitchell Field here. And now in the middle of Mitchell Field is one of the bases, the elephant cage, or the dinosaur cage, sits right in the middle of Mitchell Field. The runway you can't even see anymore. To David asking that question, if you can show me which building that is, I'd be happy to show you more photos. If you message me after this, I can send you all the photos for that location if you want them. I think we're ready to unmute mics. If somebody wants to ask questions, I'm going to stop my screen share here.
Brian, that was an absolutely great presentation. I enjoyed the heck out of that. I got a lot out of it as a historian. So anyone who wants to ask questions, you are totally able to unmute your mics, totally able to turn your video back on. And of course, Brian, whenever you get a chance, may scroll back up and answer any questions in chat that you might have missed. Thanks a lot for that. I really got a lot out of that.
Yeah, no problem. Well, and it's my first Zoom presentation too. So I've never done anything like this where I'm not standing in front of people, or where people couldn't raise their hand and ask questions at the time. So definitely coming up with stuff and not getting an audience reaction. So I don't know if people were chuckling when I was talking about rats and, phallic objects in high schools and that kind of thing. So that's really tough here on a Zoom presentation. So I appreciate everybody for listening in. Any questions? As far as seeing other buildings, you can message me. If you don't have Facebook, you can text me. I don't mind giving out my number. It's 907-723-9984. If you want to text me, we can exchange email addresses. I can send you photos. My email address is alaskanweed, ALASKANWEED @yahoo.com. And I'm happy to send photos to anybody that was stationed on Adak or had family there that wants to see more photos or video.
Hey, Brian, Scott, and Juno, nice presentation. Very well done. When is the next or the Netflix TV series, or when is that going to start? Do you have any idea?
I don't know what you're talking about, Scott. Like I said, I'm under a non-disclosure agreement, so if you do know about something, I can't talk about it.
Thanks, Brian. That was great. Can you reiterate how do you get to Adak? Alaska Airlines goes there a couple times a week.
Yeah, Alaska Airlines goes there a couple times a week. I looked at prices and looked at using miles, and for the most part, using miles is the better way to get to Adak. The cheapest flight using miles for Alaska Airlines tends to be 7,500 miles, I think it was. It wasn't a bad price. I would totally do it to go back. I probably wouldn't pay cash. I would use my miles. Couple flights every week. I found the same price in miles from Juneau or Anchorage to Adak, depending on which flights I took. You just got to be kind of picky with your flights.
All right.
Definitely set up where you're going to stay ahead of time. It is possible to camp there, but you're going to have to go to the main building for the Aleutian Corporation. You can get a week pass for like $30 or something. And then it lets you explore on their land. You could camp in a tent if you wanted to. Some people stay in some of the old Quonset huts, that kind of thing, to try to stay out of the rain. I'd still recommend setting up a tent and don't eat anywhere you sleep, because like I said, there's rats everywhere. Somebody did mention in the comments that at one point the rats were tried to be eradicated. I can guarantee there are millions of rats on Adak. Some of my footage is me squealing like a little girl when I'm moving the chairs in the tunnel and the rats are trying to climb up onto the chair and get to me. And I was afraid I was going to tip off the chair and fall into the water with them. Several times I went camping, but every time I went camping, I always camped on a small island in the middle of a lake, or I camped on an island right near, Adak Island proper. And I didn't have trouble with rats on the small little islands. So many things to explore. A lot of people go there for caribou hunting. If your friends are going there for caribou hunting and you're not into hunting, go there anyway and go exploring. You're going to have a rental vehicle, because most houses come with rental vehicles. So you're going to be able to drive around and look around. For the most part, they were all 4-wheel drive pickups. You can drive the World War II roads. Most of the roads are fairly well maintained. Only a couple spots did I think I was going to get stuck, and I knew it was risky when I drove through it, because I could tell it was this giant mud puddle. And so I was like, should I go? Should I not? Every time I went through, of course. But then I never went back through it again. And so you definitely can look at the roads and decide, be like, that's not a safe road to drive on. But for the most part, the roads are hard packed gravel, and people drove on them like crazy during World War II. So they're really packed down and really solid, and you're not sinking in mud anywhere.
All right.
Yeah,
A lot of
when I was there, we used to go up to the old dump site up on the hill up above the bearing area and hunt rats at night with a flashlight.
Yeah.
As much ammo as you could expend, we would put up there.
I talked to some locals who would go up with 22s to some of the dump sites and do that at night. And they never changed the population of the rats there. Even Maisie, the dog, on some of our hikes, she'd disappear into the tall grass. You'd hear a squeak and she'd come back eating something. And she'd kill 20 rats every hike. Somebody asked what dates I was out there. I was out there almost 2 years ago now. How many miles of hard pack roads? I don't know, but in the 10 weeks I was there, I went through 3 tanks of gas. The first tank was on my employer, and the other 2 I had to pay for myself. And the price of gas was $5.29 a gallon.
Yeah, when I was there, it was like 12 miles of 12 miles of paved road and about 100 and something of unpaved, unmaintained.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure it's something similar to that now. And they're all kind of interconnected, so you can do loops. I went end of summer, so I went August, September, October, November. I think we got out of there right before December. Puddles were freezing. The snow had come down the mountain. We had snow in town a couple of times, but it would melt off by afternoon. I saw a lot of birds. If you're into bird watching and animal watching, tons of different birds. Saw 3 different types of eagles. There was a stellar sea eagle, bald eagle, and I don't know if I can remember the other kind of eagle, but there were three different kinds of eagles that were identified to us. Albatross, of course, every kind of seagull you'd ever want to see, but a lot of different songbirds, hawks. And you could sit up on some of these high grass hills with a telephoto lens and take pictures of just all kinds of birds all day long. If you're into the fuzzy animals, there are a couple foxes on the island. I didn't see them myself, but some of the other crew members did. Excuse me. And there were seals and sea otters like crazy. Seals were everywhere, and sea otters in Clam Lagoon, and they'd come real close up to your pack raft. I was afraid these sea lions would jump on there with me. Why didn't I take Cat with me? I should have. I was about a week away from leaving on my trip, and I was going to bring my dog Cat, and I changed my mind at the last minute, and I wish I would have brought her. She would have had a good time. I was actually worried about the rats, but after seeing how Maisie was killing the rats pretty easily, Cat would have been fine. I was kind of worried Cat would get bit by a rat and get an infection, and there's no vet services. Hospital services, there's like one medical provider. My understanding, it's like a nurse level. So if you have an emergency, you're going to get medevaced out of there, and the medevac's coming from Anchorage. They said basically, from the time you get hurt, from the time you're in the Anchorage hospital, you're probably looking at 12 plus hours. So if you do get injured on Adak, it is going to be a long day for you if it's a bad injury.
I know one thing, I sure missed my time I was there. I loved it.
Yeah. Car rentals on the island. There are 2 outfitter companies. The one we went through was Aleutian Outfitters, but there are 2 kind of hunting companies. And when you rent one of the 4plexes from them, you also have to rent a vehicle. Like some people say, like, oh, I'm going to rent a bike or a 4-wheeler or whatever. They pretty much make it so you have to rent a vehicle. And that's really the only way you're going to get around town, especially if you're caribou hunting. You are not going to drag a caribou all the way back to town. So yes, there's lots of car rentals, but keep in mind, every car is older than 1994. Unless they brought it in on a barge, which my understanding costs about $5,000 to bring a barge in with a new car on it. And we only saw 2 new cars on the island. Anybody else? I'm happy to answer questions, no matter, like, even if you think it's a dumb question, or somebody might already asked it and you didn't hear the answer.
Were there any
Did you-
outfitters that would take you around the north end of the island on a boat?
Yes, almost all the outfitters would take you around. Keep in mind, it's pretty expensive and it's, weather dependent. Aleutian Outfitters had a pretty big boat that I felt safe on. We went to the south side of the island with Aleutian Outfitters, and there were some big waves out there. And Scott, owner of Aleutian Outfitters, he's like, I've been out way bigger than this. It was actually pretty nice for him. I had never been out in like open ocean before, so they were like 10 footers, but they were just kind of big rollers. I get seasick, so I wasn't really like in the best of moods, but he felt comfortable with it. Therefore, I felt comfortable with it. But I know they can take you around the island if you really wanted to, but it would be fairly expensive. What are the ptarmigan numbers like? I could have run over probably 20 ptarmigans a day with my truck. In fact, I have video of them walking in front of my truck to the point they won't get out of the way. And I could get out of the vehicle and punt kick them across the tundra if I really wanted to. There was so many ptarmigan on the island. Who is buying 4plexes? Some people are buying them and using them when they go hunting. Some people rent them out. Aleutian Outfitters has bought a whole bunch because, you know, they're trying to grow as a company. Some people have talked about bed and breakfasts, but for the most part, the Aleutian Corporation owns them. I wouldn't say there's this mass running to buy houses in Adak, but you know, if you're looking for a quiet place to live off the face of the earth, then you know, order stuff on Amazon where it takes 3 to 4 weeks to get to you. Adak's not a bad place. What was the worst weather I encountered? The worst weather I encountered was wind speeds over probably 80 miles an hour. It was so bad, we did not go outside. My work actually ordered everyone to stay inside and away from windows. I saw pieces of roofing blowing by, insulation. You'd go out the next day and things would be moved around all over the place. Everybody has electricity and running water, but it's all done through diesel. The running water used to come from Lake Betty, but now comes from a different lake because Lake Betty was found to be a little toxic from World War II. The new water source, they say is safe. I drank right out of the tap because they said it was safe, but later I found out all the locals pretty much drink bottled water. A couple times the power would go out on super windy days, but the 2 electric guys got things back up and running pretty quick. Hot springs access. How far away from the airport is the hot springs? Yes, you definitely want to drive there. Yeah, probably 6-7 miles of winding roads to get to the hot springs parking lot area. And then it's a good mile hike, you know, like I said, climbing up and down ropes to get to the actual hot springs. I was the only one who actually made it to the hot springs out of our whole group. And I only went once after I saw kind of how sad it was. There's no way you'd want to go lay in it after seeing, you know, 20 baby seals like rolling around in it.
The hot springs wasn't that bad once the birthing season was over and the babies were all gone.
Okay, that would make sense. But yeah, every time I saw them, they were, you know, taking a nap in the pools.
Yeah, during that time of year, it would be that way. One time first time I was there in 72, there were some guys out there hunting seals in Kulak Bay, and they decided to they had a rubber boat at the time, a little outboard on it. This big black dorsal fin came up out of the water within about 15 feet of them. Boy, they turned around and came back to shore real fast.
Oh, yeah. So speaking of mentioning killer whales, there was a white killer whale that was spotted while we were there. Not an albino, but this grayish white color killer whale that was spotted on the south side of the island while we were there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Apparently not very common. Oh yeah, you definitely have to watch out when you open your vehicle doors on Adak. You always point the nose of the vehicle into the wind. Otherwise, and I found out the hard way, the wind will grab the door and fold it in half against the front of the vehicle. And it doesn't matter how hard you're holding onto that door handle. You will still be holding onto the door handle, but you'll just be holding onto the plastic part, and the rest of the door will smash into the side of the vehicle. I did that probably in my first week, and Scott from Aleutian Outfitters just kind of looked at the door and he's like, well, that's not the first time, and busted out a couple sledgehammers out of his garage area and pounded the door back into place. And my truck had all kinds of problems. Like, I think the first quarter mile I drove, the muffler fell off and I had to get out and throw it in the back of the vehicle. The heater didn't work. One of the windows didn't roll down, and I had no working fan. So on moist, wet days, it just fogged up and I couldn't see anything half the time. So sometimes I drive with like the door cracked open and me just kind of holding the door open.
Been there and done that with the wind, believe me. A lot of people took a big pieces of seatbelt material, seatbelt webbing and
Uh-huh.
screwed it into the frame and the door to keep it from going very far.
I do have a couple of videos since there are still people on here. I'll play a couple of those videos here real quick. Let me go back to my screen share since people are sticking around. I know it's hard to see stuff in the pictures, but give you an example of some of these sunrises and sunsets. This is out at the Hot Springs Beach area. And I'm going to zoom in out here and you're going to see 60 miles across the Aleutian chain to this island. And this was a fairly non-windy day. Usually the microphone's just howling with wind.
I believe that's Tanaga in the background.
This one right here.
Yeah, that one, the second most perfectly shaped volcano in the world next to Mount Fuji.
Yeah, I measured it on my GPS. It was 62 miles away. And I'll show you kind of what it looked like wandering through one of the buildings. It was always dark and spooky.
Bathrooms. There was that.
This is at the Navy base
restaurant
with the
thing
bowling
there.
alleys.
And then this would have been the bowling alley, but it's been completely sealed off. But somebody found it. Busted through the wall here. But it's completely sealed in now. So there's just the pin room down at the far end, and then this hole here is the only way to access it. There's the lockers. Light switches. You can see where the lanes used to be and the ball collector, or however they did it. Not sure how the ball returned. Unless they sealed it. And these are our stairs up. Telephone booth. That door is sealed. I don't know what's back there, but I can't get it open.
So kind of what it looked like going through some of the old buildings. An example of a windy day. This is Husky Pass.
We're at the top of Husky Pass, standing on the ridge, which is stupid because it's really cold. Here's a Rommel spike. It's an anti-personnel device. People were supposed to fall on them and get skewered. Back there's Bay Islands.
So pretty windy most of the time. In the mornings, if you're into birds and eagles and want to get some amazing eagle footage, pretty much every morning on windy mornings, the eagles would circle two hills right next to Adak. And this will be my last video for you. But hundreds of eagles would circle these hills in the early mornings and just kind of hover. It's blowing about 60 miles an hour. So I leave you with that. Thank you for joining me talking about Adak. You can always follow along on Juneau's Hidden History on Facebook or Alaska's Hidden History on Facebook. They're the two groups that I run on Facebook. If you're into Alaska type history or history of kind of Southeast Alaska, is where we post all our stuff. There's videos, there's pictures, and I'm always available to answer questions or send me an email and I can share photos. All my photos are free for commercial use or non-commercial use, excuse me, and for educational purposes. So if you ever need a photo, let me know and I'm happy to send it to you.
Thanks, Brian. That was great.
Great, very entertaining, and thanks for the public service of documenting all that for people. That's pretty wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, I agree. It was very, yeah, it brought back a lot of memories. A lot of memories. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thanks a lot, Brian. Yeah, like I said, I got a lot out of that. It was a great presentation. As a historian, it's something I definitely appreciate. And who knows, with the recent increase of buzzing by Russian airplanes and near Alaskan airspace and Chinese ships in the Aleutian, Adak Island might not be done with. So we'll see. For anyone who wants to see this presentation again, this will be available on the Haynesboro Public Library website in the next 48 hours. If you missed anything or you wanted any more of Brian's information, this will be available to rewatch. Again, thank you, Brian, for presentation. Thank you, Russ and Cindy, for your work on the Armchair Traveler series. It's been absolutely fantastic. I can't wait to see the next one. And for everyone who showed up, thank you for showing up, for enjoying this. And I hope we'll see you next time. I hope everyone has a good night.
Bye, Rose.
Goodbye, all.
Bye, Mrs. Haywood. Good to see you.
40 years ago.
Hey.
That is so weird. That really is.